Yeah, back on Morning Line with us this morning, Davidson County Sheriff Darren Hall talking the issue. One of the top things that he's discussing this morning that he's dealing with is the situation with privatization. And before we get to the phone calls, and folks may have thoughts on it, just to recap for folks joining us right now, this past week, I guess it was one of the Metro Council persons suggesting what? And did this take you by surprise? Did it blindside you a bit?
Yeah, it sure did. Because we studied it for a year and a half, we worked with a council member who was very passionate and obviously, I think, did the right thing, studied it with us, and then took a position not for privatization. I'm not for or against privatization. There will never be a jail under my control that should be private, as far as I'm concerned. This is a prison. It's been an arrangement since 1990. It is the state paying for everything that goes on in that facility. I mean, we sent them a bill when the air unit breaks, the state pays for the facility. So it's a state responsibility. It's a contractual arrangement that's complicated. So all of the Metro activists believe it's a Metro thing. There's not $1 of Metro money going there. Okay, it's not a Metro responsibility. It's confusing, I get that. What's disappointing to me is after we spent a year and a half studying it, and by the way, that council member, O'Connell, sent the study to every one of the council members. He told me that. And so my frustration is I have a lot to do. We have a lot of jobs to do. Nashville has big problems. But I don't think we should be revisiting something that we spent all this time on. And his response, Councilman O'Connell on this show, was we need to rebid the contract and then we can study it along the way. It gives you a 90-day out clause. You can end it anytime you want. The reason I'm frustrated is I have people over here trying to get the RFP process ready to go. We worked with activists to increase the productivity of that contract, things they wanted in there. We spent a lot of time to get it right for them. Now, a different set of activists who's against privatization gets to a brand new council member who files legislation in the wee hours of the day, never has talked to us at all, unlike Councilman O'Connell who came and said, here's what I'd like to do. And I said, okay, we would be happy to do it. Let us study that for you and give you the results. And it doesn't say stick with privatization. It says, does the city want to spend X amount of money? It's $4 million just to walk in and take over the building for us.
So this would, clearly, if a change came, it would cost the city money.
Millions and millions of dollars. Okay, and let me say this, Nick, millions and millions of dollars, probably in the upwards of $10 to $20 million. It depends on the capacity out there. Today it's $10 million. It could be $20 million by the end of the year based on the people you're sending out there. We don't have the money, according to everybody out here, but more importantly, we spent $200 million. We've planned a building, we've designed a building, we're training in the building right now. That is our focus. We're about to move the most significant serious offenders in our county back into a building. I do not need to be down here trying to figure out how we're going to hire 200 people to take over a prison because some activists are upset about privatization.
How quickly will we know whether something happens? There has to be the contract renewed January of 2020,
January
right?
of 2020.
So, and this is, the council is going to look at this issue between now and then?
My understanding is there's legislation that this council member is going to file. It won't surprise me if there's a lot of support for that, because if you don't take the interest in reading why it's at risk, I'm very afraid the council gets into the activist mode and votes into something without thinking about it. They're not bad people, but there's 40 of them with a lot of issues to take into consideration. And all of a sudden, this sounds like the right thing to do without getting into the details. I spoke with Councilman O'Connell. He goes, the irony is, I'd have to vote against this.
Well, have you reached out to Councilman? Is it Benedict?
She's coming at 9 o'clock this morning.
So you're going to talk with her?
Right.
Okay.
It's a little late.
At your office?
It's a little late after you've gone public with legislation you're going to file, and after council members have already been on record. I was emailing and texting council members coming over here this morning, because if you're going to endorse and support something without getting both sides of the issues, whatever they are, you're not an informed decision maker. And as a council member, you better learn to be informed. I don't care if you go with what we want or what you want, but you should take both sides and understand the issues, because the city's decisions are important. You're spending a lot of money on other conversations. You're saying we don't have money to pay for schools and body cameras. That's all true. Raises for employees. I got people worried about being laid off because this week there's worry that we don't have the money to pay people. And now we're going out here making arrangements to end a contract that will cost you millions and millions of dollars. In the middle of an investment we spent $200 million on to do the right way, and we've been doing it the right way, and I don't have the energy to go get my staff focused on taking over what is a private prison because of some activist position.
Yeah.
We need to come up with what's right for the city.
And I can tell you're worked up about this. As you say, you don't really care one way or the other. The point is that if this is going to be done at some point where the city decides to go that route, it shouldn't be done hastily right now. Let's take some time, just like Councilman O'Connell, former Councilman, had done. which was getting the information, looking at it, saying now's not the time, let's look at it, maybe it's next year, but let's pursue it. I understand the arguments against privatization.
Me too,
I understand where that's coming
me too.
from, so I'm not saying these activists are necessarily wrong on a lot of their points. It's just when and how you do it and what the impact is on the taxpayer here in Davidson County.
And it nullifies what I spent 6 people to go study this, to come up with the objective facts.
Are you going to give the councilwoman a copy of it? She has? Well, she's new.
From Councilman O'Connell. I asked him in the last 2 days. And so the point of it is, that's frustrating. It's not frustrating that you're against privatization or for privatization. I said when I ran 20 years ago, and I've kept my word, we have not privatized one jail, nor will we ever in my days of this job. But I don't believe we need to be getting into the prison business. The sheriffs shouldn't run prisons. Okay? Those people who are convicted felons, by definition, are in a prison when you put them all in one room and they're convicted felons. So, and it's operated by a private provider today. If you, as a council, want the state to take it over, then you've got to find buildings and space for, it's over $100 million to replace animal control, South Precinct, fire halls, all of our facilities would have to leave. There's a metro park out there that all turns over to the state. So that's a risky, expensive proposition. The other one is, you're going to then subsidize the state of Tennessee. It is a state prison, a state inmate. So if the state's going to send X amount of money, but you so much are against privatization that you want us to take it over, it's going to cost me more than it costs private companies to run it. That amount of money is somewhere between $10 and $20 million a year when you do it the way we're talking about. It would be very similar to going out here on 440 where there's potholes. It's a state road, and taking metro money and metro landscaping, if you will, and going and fixing a state responsibility. If you want to do that, fine. That's your money as a city. Okay, you owe us, the operation who's going to have to go take over that, the time and the ability to do it in the right way. And what's frustrating is now there's a bill filed, and council members very likely get caught up in the momentum of that bill. We could wake up here in a few weeks having to take over a prison in January, the same month that we're opening a $200 million complex. It makes no sense at all. And I'm frustrated that people wouldn't look to, not me, you don't have to listen to me at all, Councilman O'Connell, who does not clearly want private prisons. But he did it the right way, which is now let's renew this and continue the conversation, because Nashville has some financial problems themselves, and maybe we move in that direction in the future. That is fine with me. I'm not against it at all. I'm totally against us doing it the way this is being done.
All right, I'd like to be a fly on the wall. This meeting, it's going to be interesting. Well, you got to reach out. I know you're frustrated with it, but it's not too late to address this, obviously.
And we're busy. There's a lot to do.
I know.
The city
it's
has a
not
lot
like
to
you
do.
don't have other things. Let's see what folks think, Sheriff. And yeah, we'll see. And we'll follow up, and we'll try to reach out to Councilman Benedict as well, see if we can get a comment from her. Let's go to Joe. Joe, good morning.
Good morning, Nick.
Hey, Joe.
Sheriff.
Good morning, Joe.
I'm looking forward to the grand opening of the new jail.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that we've got a spokesman like the sheriff that will kind of inform people in Davidson County and even the state on what's going on with this crap, with this so-called prison out there. And you know, this is the state has several prisons in the state that are run by a private organization, and I can tell you right now, I know from some people that work in these places, they're the problem child. Somebody that's doing these, running these, taking over these state prisons and privatizing them, are making a lot of money, and they causing problems all the time, but nobody seems to want to do anything about it. But wrapping that up, I'm proud of the sheriff can dictate it. And one of the problems, as far as I'm concerned, with Metro government, we've got 40 council members. That's the largest council of any Metro government in the United States.
That's right.
Everybody's got a different opinion. But wrapping it up, if I ever get put in jail, I hope it's in the Davidson County jail.
Joe, that's not going to happen. You're too good of a person. I know better than that. So that's great.
Well, I appreciate, and people do sometimes, just the general public gets mixed up sometimes between prisons and jails,
Yes.
and understanding it. When you say sheriffs should not handle prisons, people are, well, isn't that what a sheriff does? No. Sheriffs handle jails.
Right.
Jails. They're the county municipality or whatever. Prisons are either federal or state.
And I think it's worth, I mean, the analogy's always worked for me, at least in my mind, is, you know, a medical facility, if you want to call it that, is a nursing home and also an emergency room. But imagine trying to run that. They're two totally different functions. You're processing, I mean, here's a good number. If you build a 1,000-bed prison and a 1,000-bed jail side by side in a year, in an average year, that prison turns over 750 of those 1,000 people. So really, you've touched 1,750 people. The 1,000-bed jail right next door turns over 36 times. So there's 36,000 people compared to 1,700 people.
Difference.
It's just a totally, I've worked in jails and prisons, both. The reality of how they operate is different. You control movement, you control time. By the time you take a prisoner, they're detoxed, they're clean, they're identified, classified. I mean, there's all sorts of reasons, and you're housing me. I got to treat you that way. In a jail, we're assessing, you're transitioning all the time. There's all that going on. And so when you operate a jail, it will be more expensive than a prison because jails have all of that dynamic and prisons don't. They have their own issues. But what disappoints me, and this is, it's unfortunately way back into the late 80s and 90s, the overcrowding built the facility to house state people because they were backing up in the jails. I was working here then, but I was in a peon role. I had no idea what was going on. We were overcrowded, being sued, and so we were being sued for a variety of reasons. You had state prisoners backed up, you had federal prisoners backed up. So the federal court ordered the federal prisoners out, and that the state must work with the county to build or come up with space for those prisoners. That turned into being the facility we're talking about. And so while it was being built, the city and the county, I assume, said, well, it's not really the county's responsibility to run it. The state goes, yeah, but we got plenty of prisons. Why don't, and I wasn't there, but that starts, and way back then, private prisons were kind of a new thing. It's been privately managed the entire time. Joe's right that there are problems in private prisons in this state. There's also problems in state-run prisons in every state, including ours. That's not an indictment of anybody. I just think we need to be careful. What happens in a prison, we have a monitor there. I have problems myself. I remember years ago I was on this show, council members were all stirred up over there were scabies. Scabies was at this new at the Core Civic facility. I came on this show and said we had scabies too. Every jail and prison does. We got to be careful. It's not time to throw stones when something like that is happening in multiple facilities. If it's all their fault, I'll be the first to say it. There are problems when you have incidents, but we monitor what's going on there. And so I can't now come on the show and say, or come publicly and say, they're not doing their job. We're monitoring. We wrote the contract. So what we did this time was, or we tried to do this time, improve the contract. The requirements in the contract have been improved. Because the activists we were meeting with for a year and a half wanted additional things placed in there. We did that in the new RFP. Now they're trying to stop the process altogether without even looking at what all is done. So,
well, all right, the pressure's on. We'll see what happens in the coming days, especially after your meeting with the council member later today. Listen, we'll take a break. When we come back, more calls. Got some other questions I want to ask you, including the idea of isolation, locking up prisoners without access and to other humans. We'll take a break. Be back with more of your phone calls as well right after this.
The Storm 5 weather update. For weather on the go, download the Storm Shield app.
Hi everyone, I'm